It's James Castle from the Brunswick Heritage Museum. Welcome to this episode of Brunswick History 101. I was just admiring one of my favorite items in my personal collection. This is a photograph taken at the Harpers Ferry lock in 1889. It shows a canal boat going through the lock, the old Salty Dog Tavern, the canal house, a lot of the raw infrastructure that was put in. And the other thing that's amazing is the mountainside that it took to actually blast and to put this infrastructure in. So that leads us to what today's episode is going to be about. Today's episode is going to be about two major corporations coming to Brunswick at the same time in 1834. And ironically, starting at the same time, July 4th, 1828. And this will lead us up to how the B&O Railroad and the C&O Canal both come to Brunswick in 1834. Enjoy. It was George Washington's dream of channeling out the Potomac River for more transportation from the west than the rafts and flatboats were providing in the 1700s. That dream was never realized, but nearly 30 years after his death, the C&O Canal came very close to meeting his dream. With the state's independence secured at the end of the American Revolution, the nation was ready to grow west to the Ohio River. Standing in the way was the formidable Allegheny Mountain Range. Although George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and influential Virginians all saw the Potomac River as an important connection between the eastern colonies and the west, the national road from Baltimore had already reached the Ohio River at Wheeling, Virginia, and was being used by hundreds of thousands of settlers to travel west. Those roads worked for people, but it wasn't as effective for moving goods. In fact, hauling cargo over land was more than 30 times more expensive than flatwater canal transport. In 1785, Washington chartered the Potomac Company, spelled P-A-T-O-W-M-A-C, as a nod to the Native American spelling of the river. With the purpose of clearing the river channel and building skirting canals around the river's more turbulent sections. But the country had other plans for Washington. After chairing the Constitutional Convention, Washington was elected as the first president of the United States in 1789. He appointed his friend, Thomas Johnson, to fill out his post as president of the Potomac Company, but kept an eye on the difficult work being done there. After 2 terms as president, Washington returned to the Potomac Company, but lack of funds slowed down progress, especially the difficult channel around Great Falls. In 1799, at about the same time Maryland legislature purchased additional stock in the company, Washington died. 3 years later, the locks of Great Falls were opened to the Potomac at last became a navigable route. Early canal construction by the Potomac Company consisted of building navigable skirting canals on the Potomac River around some of its formidable rapids at Harpers Ferry, Seneca, Little Falls, and especially Great Falls. Probably the greatest challenge was the skirting canal at Great Falls, where the Potomac Company blasted through solid rock on the Virginia side. The Great Falls locks were applauded in European technical journals as engineering feats of their time. With skirting canals in place, a keel boat could travel from Cumberland to Georgetown in about 4 days. After the War of 1812, the first order of business was better internal transportation. Lack of navigation along the seacoast proved challenging for the U.S. Navy during the war, and Army had been held back as well. Virginia Congressman Charles Fenton Mercer led an effort to pass a resolution for a continuous canal up the Potomac. President James Monroe was impressed with the plan, and the U.S. engineers were asked to study the proposal. The estimated price tag for the canal was $22 million, which was unheard of for that period of time. Canal lobbyists asked for another estimate by another group of engineers that reduced the estimate to $4.5 million, taking the canal as far as Cumberland. With the very first shovelful of dirt, the construction of the C&O Canal proved to be fraught with difficulty. Groundbreaking for the canal took place on July 4th, 1828, near Little Falls. After much fanfare, lavish meals for attending officials, a boat ride up the Potomac, and speeches, President John Quincy Adams dug in and hit rocks and roots in his first attempt before he was successful. The groundbreaking was difficult and was only a sign of the challenges ahead. The canal company was committed to building 100 miles of canal in just 5 years. No large-scale construction companies existed to take on the project. There were no detailed engineer drawings, just lists of written specifications, and in many sections the raw resources used to build locks were scarce. Still, Americans were determined to build this waterway west. More than 462 proposals were submitted by close to 100 different contractors. Businesses such as sawmills were established along the route to support construction. It was the beginning of a long, difficult journey. Construction of the canal reached Berlin in 1834. Lots near the river were sold to the C&O Canal by Perry Hillary in 1836, Daniel Willard in 1838, John McPherson in 1840, and Jonathan Stambeck in 1846. The fast-growing port city of Baltimore, Maryland faced economic stagnation unless it opened routes to the western states. Two men, Philip E. Thomas and George Brown, were the pioneers of the B&O Railroad. They spent the year 1826 investigating railway enterprises in England, which were at the time being tested in a comprehensive fashion as commercial ventures. Their investigation completed, they had an organizational meeting on February 12, 1827, including about 25 citizens, most of whom were Baltimore merchants or bankers. Chapter 123 of the 1826 Session Laws of Maryland passed February 28, 1827, and the Commonwealth of Virginia on March 8, 1827, chartered the B&O Railroad Company, with the task of building a railroad from the Port of Baltimore west to a suitable point on the Ohio River. The railroad, formally incorporated April 24th, was intended to provide faster route for goods. Thomas was elected as the first president and Brown the treasurer. The B&O was initially capitalized in 1827 with a $3 million issue of stock. Virtually every citizen of Baltimore owned a share. Construction began on July 4, 1828, when Charles Carroll of Carrollton, one of the last living signers of the Declaration of Independence, performed the groundbreaking and laying of the cornerstone. The first section, from Baltimore to Ellicott's Mills, opened on May 24, 1830. A horse pulled the first 26 miles of track and back, since the B&O did not decide to use steam power for several years. The B&O's first locomotive, the Tom Thumb, was made in America and would pull passenger and freight cars at 18 miles per hour. Developers decided to follow the Patapsco River to a point near Parr's Ridge, now known as Mount Airy, where the railroad would cross a height of land and descend into the valley of the Monocacy and Potomac rivers. Further extensions opened to Frederick on December 1, 1831, Point of Rocks on April 2, 1832, and Berlin and Sandy Hook in 1834. So we hope you enjoyed this episode. Future episodes will actually talk more about the B&O Railroad leading up to 1890, and another episode will talk about the C&O Canal and its operations in Berlin and Brunswick. If you can, if you are enjoying these episodes, please feel free to donate via PayPal, and we appreciate you watching, and tune into a future episode. Thank you.